My name is Evelyn Carter. I am 55 years old, and I live in a quiet neighborhood in the United States. If you saw me walking past you on the street, you would never guess how heavy my heart has been for most of my life. People think pain is loud. They think suffering comes with tears, shouting, and drama. But the deepest pain is silent. It lives inside you while you smile, while you cook dinner, while you ask others if they are okay, even when you are not. I was not always this quiet woman. Once I had opinions, dreams, a voice that wanted to be heard, but life slowly taught me how to stay silent. I grew up believing one simple thing: if I give everything to my family, life will eventually give me happiness back. That belief shaped every decision I made. I married young, like many women do. I believed love meant sacrifice, and sacrifice meant being a good wife, and later, a good mother. At first, my life looked normal from the outside: a small home, children's laughter, busy mornings. But inside, something was already missing. I learned very early how to ignore my own needs. If I was tired, I told myself to keep going. If I was hurt, I told myself it didn't matter, because that's what good mothers do, right? Years passed like this, quietly, quickly. And then one day, while standing alone in my kitchen, I looked at my reflection in the dark window and asked myself a question that scared me. When was the last time I lived for myself? I didn't have an answer. I didn't know it then, but that unanswered question was the beginning of everything. When I was in my early 20s, I believed life followed a simple formula: study a little, marry a good man, build a family, grow old peacefully. That was the dream sold to many women like me. I met Daniel at a small community event. He was confident, well-spoken, and ambitious. He talked about goals, stability, and responsibility. Compared to my quiet nature, he felt like safety. When he asked me to marry him, I didn't hesitate for long, not because I was deeply in love, but because I was afraid of being left behind in life. The wedding was simple. No big drama, no loud happiness either. After marriage, reality didn't hit suddenly. It arrived slowly, like a quiet knock you ignore at first. Daniel liked things his way: what we ate, where we went, how money was spent. At the beginning, I told myself, this is normal. Marriage needs adjustment. So I adjusted. When he spoke over me in conversations, I stayed silent. When he made decisions without asking, I convinced myself it was love, not control. The first real compromise came one evening. I had been accepted into a short training program. It wasn't anything big, but it mattered to me. I told Daniel about it with a soft smile, expecting support. Instead, he frowned and said, "Why do you need this now? We'll have children soon. Focus on home." That night, I lay awake for hours. The acceptance letter rested quietly in my drawer. The next morning, I folded it carefully and threw it away. Not because I wanted to, but because I thought that was what a good wife should do. I didn't realize then that this small decision would become a habit, and habits shape lives. That was the first time I chose peace over purpose, and it wouldn't be the last.
Pregnancy changed everything, but not in the way people describe in movies. There were no glowing smiles, no magical happiness, only responsibility, arriving earlier than expected. When my first child was born, the room was filled with voices: doctors, nurses, family members. Yet somehow, I felt invisible. Everyone talked about the baby. No one asked how I was holding up. Days blended into nights, feeding schedules, crying, endless tiredness. Daniel returned to work quickly. He said it was necessary. Someone had to earn. I stayed home. At first, I told myself this was temporary, just a phase. Motherhood required patience. But time has a strange way of turning phases into permanent realities. My world became small, not physically, but emotionally. I stopped reading books, stopped thinking about my interests, stopped asking questions. My second child arrived 2 years later. With it came more noise, more expectations, and less space for me. Whenever I felt overwhelmed, I reminded myself of one sentence people often said: "You chose this life." So I accepted exhaustion as normal, loneliness as part of love. I learned to smile while carrying heaviness inside. Sometimes, late at night, after everyone was asleep, I would sit in the living room, listening to the ticking clock. That sound became my companion. In those quiet moments, I wondered who I might have become if I had made different choices. But the morning always came, and with it, responsibilities pulled me back. There was no room for regret, only survival. I didn't realize I was slowly disappearing until there was almost nothing left of me. As the years passed, life became more expensive, and patience became thinner. Bills arrived every month without mercy: rent, utilities, school expenses, groceries that never seemed to last. Daniel started coming home late. At first, he blamed work, then traffic, then stress. I didn't question him much. I was too busy calculating numbers in my head, wondering which payment could wait and which one could not. I tried finding small ways to earn: babysitting, helping neighbors, selling handmade items online. Each time I mentioned something bigger, a part-time course, a better opportunity, Daniel dismissed it with a wave of his hand. "Who will take care of the kids? Why complicate things? This is fine the way it is." Fine. That word became a wall. At family gatherings, people praised him for being responsible, for working hard, for providing. I stood beside him, smiling politely, while my contribution stayed invisible. No one saw the unpaid labor, the sleepless nights, the emotional load. Slowly, conversations between us changed. We talked only about logistics, pickups, payments, schedules. There were no real discussions anymore, no shared dreams, only tasks. I began to feel like a background character in my own marriage. Sometimes I would speak, and no one would respond, not because they were angry, but because they weren't listening. That kind of silence hurts differently. I told myself I was being dramatic, that many women lived like this, that endurance was strength. But deep down, a quiet voice kept asking, "Is this really all life has to offer?" I didn't know then that neglect doesn't start with cruelty. It starts with indifference.
Somewhere along the way, I stopped blaming circumstances and started blaming myself. If the house felt heavy, I assumed I wasn't managing well enough. If Daniel seemed distant, I wondered if I had become uninteresting. If the children acted out, I questioned my parenting. Every problem found its way back to me. I looked in the mirror one morning and barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked older than her years, not because of wrinkles, but because her eyes had lost curiosity. I stopped buying clothes for myself. It felt unnecessary, almost selfish. When I laughed, it felt forced, like a performance I was expected to give. I avoided old friends, not because I didn't miss them, but because I didn't know how to explain my life anymore. What do you do these days? That question scared me. I did everything, yet had no answer. At night, when the house finally slept,
My thoughts refused to rest. I replayed conversations, rechecked decisions, analyzed every moment to find where I had gone wrong. Sleep became light, dreams became rare. There were moments when tears came suddenly, not from sadness alone, but from pressure that had nowhere else to go. I never spoke about it. I didn't want to sound weak. I didn't want to complain. Strong women don't complain, right? So I carried everything quietly, believing silence was maturity. But silence doesn't heal, it only hides the damage. And inside me, something was slowly cracking. I kept telling myself I was strong, until I realized strength shouldn't feel this painful. The moment didn't arrive with drama, no shouting, no big argument. It came quietly, on a regular afternoon that looked exactly like every other day. I was folding laundry when I realized I had been standing in the same place for several minutes, holding the same shirt, doing nothing. My body was present, my mind wasn't. That scared me. Later that evening, Daniel talked about a promotion opportunity. More hours, more pressure, more absence. He was excited. I nodded automatically. Then he said something casually, without looking up. "You're good at handling things anyway." Handling things. Not living, not growing, just handling. That sentence stayed with me all night. The next morning, while dropping the kids at school, I sat in the car longer than usual. I watched other parents walk away. Some rushed, some laughed, some talked on the phone. They all seemed to be going somewhere. I wasn't. For the first time in years, I asked myself a question I had been avoiding. If nothing changes, will I survive this life, or will I slowly disappear inside it? The thought made my chest tighten. That day, I didn't rush home. I walked into a small public library nearby. I hadn't been inside one in years. The silence felt different. Not empty, but respectful. I picked up a random book and sat near a window. Sunlight touched the pages, and for a brief moment, I felt like a human being again, not just a role. No one needed me there. No one expected anything. That freedom felt unfamiliar and addictive. When I returned home, nothing had changed, but I had. Something inside me had finally woken up. That quiet afternoon showed me something dangerous. I could imagine a life beyond survival. After that day, I began stealing small moments for myself, not in rebellion, but in survival. Twice a week, after dropping the kids at school, I told myself I had errands. Instead, I returned to the library. No one questioned me. No one noticed. That realization hurt more than it should have. I started reading again. Not self-help books, not parenting guides, stories, real stories about people who chose differently. Each page reminded me that the world was larger than my living room. I began writing, too. Nothing fancy, just thoughts on loose paper, things I couldn't say out loud, things I had buried for years. Writing gave shape to emotions I didn't have names for. One morning, a librarian smiled and asked, "Same seat?" That simple recognition made me feel visible again. At home, I became quieter, not from weakness, but from observation. I noticed how decisions were made without my input, how plans existed that didn't include me, and instead of shrinking, I started preparing. Not to leave, not yet, but to stand. For the first time, I wasn't waiting for permission. I was learning who I was outside of everyone else's expectations. That secret space became my strength. They thought nothing had changed, but inside me, a woman was quietly returning. Change doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in the way you answer a question or choose not to. One evening, Daniel asked what I had been doing lately.
His tone wasn't curious, just habitual. For the first time, I didn't rush to explain. I simply said, "I've been taking some time to think." He looked up, surprised. About what? About life, about myself. The room felt unfamiliar suddenly, not hostile, just alert. He laughed lightly and said, "Everyone thinks too much sometimes." I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I let the sentence rest between us. That silence was new. Over the next few days, I stopped automatically saying yes. Not dramatically, not angrily, just calmly. When plans were made without asking me, I asked questions. When assumptions were spoken, I corrected them. Nothing explosive happened, yet everything felt different. I realized something powerful. I didn't need permission to exist fully. At the same time, I felt fear. Change threatens routines, and routines protect comfort, even when that comfort is one-sided. I wasn't trying to break my family. I was trying to stop breaking myself. That night, I lay awake, heart racing, wondering if quiet courage was enough. But deep inside, a steady calm had replaced the panic. I was no longer invisible to myself. I hadn't raised my voice, yet the balance had already shifted.
The shift didn't go unnoticed. It never does. Small changes make people uncomfortable when they're used to you staying the same. Daniel became quieter at home, not distant, observant. He watched how I moved, how I answered, how I no longer rushed. One afternoon, he said, "You've changed." It wasn't a compliment. It wasn't an accusation either, just a statement. I replied calmly, "I had to." That response unsettled him. Soon after, his mother visited. She always meant well, but tradition spoke louder than empathy. Over tea, she asked why the house felt different, why I seemed less available. I smiled politely. No explanations, no defense. Later that night, Daniel said, "Everyone thinks you're unhappy." That sentence stung, not because it was wrong, but because it came with pressure to return to normal. Normal had cost me too much. For the first time, I felt pulled in two directions, peace within and expectations outside. Self-doubt crept in quietly. Was I selfish? Was I risking stability? The fear returned, but it didn't control me this time. I reminded myself why I started. I wasn't demanding attention, I was reclaiming presence. That night, I didn't cry, I didn't collapse. I sat with the discomfort and stayed. Standing still felt harder than moving back, but I didn't step away from myself. There are moments in life when delaying a choice becomes more painful than making one. For me, that moment arrived on an ordinary Sunday morning. The house was full. Noise, movement, conversations overlapping, yet inside me, everything felt still. I watched my family move around without noticing my presence, not out of cruelty, but out of habit. That realization settled deeply. Later that day, I sat alone on the back porch, holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold. I wasn't angry, I wasn't dramatic, I was clear. I asked myself a simple question. If nothing changes, will I recognize myself 5 years from now? The answer came without hesitation. No. That clarity felt heavy, but also honest. I didn't decide to leave. Not yet. What I decided was something quieter, yet stronger. I would no longer shrink to maintain peace. I would pursue work, not permission. Education, not excuses. That evening, I told Daniel I planned to take a short certification course. Not a debate, not a request, a statement. He paused, looked surprised. Then he said, "Let's talk about it later." And for the first time, I replied, "We already are." That night, I slept deeply, not because everything was solved, but because I had stopped lying to myself. I hadn't left the house, but I had crossed a line inside myself. The conversation didn't happen that night, or the next. It waited,
as uncomfortable truths often do. A few days later, when the kids were out and the house felt unusually quiet, Daniel finally spoke. "So, what's really going on with you?" Not angry, not soft, careful. I took a breath before answering, not to calm myself, but to be honest. "I'm tired of disappearing," I said. "Tired of being the solution to everyone's problems except my own." He looked confused, not defensive, just lost. He said he thought things were fine, that he never meant to hurt me, that providing was his way of caring. I believed him, but intention doesn't erase impact. I told him how loneliness can exist even in a full house, how silence can feel louder than shouting. My voice didn't shake, my hands didn't tremble. That surprised both of us. For the first time, I wasn't speaking to be understood. I was speaking because I deserved to. He didn't interrupt, he didn't dismiss me, but he didn't fully understand either. And that was okay. Not every truth is absorbed immediately. What mattered was this. I had finally stepped into the space my silence once occupied. That night, the air between us felt heavy, yet cleaner. Some things were broken, some things were exposed, but nothing was hidden anymore. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I would never return to silence. The days after that conversation were strangely quiet, not peaceful, just careful. Daniel tried to be normal, kinder, more present, but something had already shifted inside me. I wasn't angry with him, I wasn't planning revenge. I was listening to myself for the first time. I attended the certification classes regularly, sat among strangers who didn't know me as a wife or a mother, only as a person learning something new. That felt powerful. At home, the balance stayed uneven. Support existed, but respect lagged behind. One evening, after finishing my coursework, I realized something undeniable. Growth needs space, and I had none. So I packed a small bag, not in haste, not in tears, just essentials: documents, clothes, my notebook. I didn't shout, I didn't threaten, I didn't explain everything. I told Daniel I needed time to stand on my own feet, emotionally and mentally. He asked if this was goodbye. I said, "This is me choosing myself without abandoning anyone." Walking out felt unreal. Not dramatic like movies, but heavy and clean at the same time. The night air felt different, like I could breathe fully. I didn't know where this path would end, but for the first time, I was walking it with my head held high. Leaving wasn't weakness, it was the first honest act of my life. The first night away was the hardest. Not because I missed the house, but because silence felt unfamiliar, without responsibility attached to it. The room I rented was small, plain walls, a narrow bed, a single window, yet it felt honest. No expectations waited for me there, no roles to perform. The next morning, I woke up early, not from duty, but from choice. I made coffee slowly, sat by the window, watched the city wake up. For the first time in years, my day belonged to me. Reality, however, arrived quickly. Money was tight, very tight. I took temporary work, office cleaning at night, data entry during the day. It was exhausting, but it was mine. Each paycheck, small as it was, felt like proof of capability. There were moments of doubt, moments when fear whispered that comfort had been safer. But then I remembered how silence had crushed me. I started walking everywhere. It cleared my thoughts and saved money. Strangers passed me daily without knowing I was rebuilding a life from the ground up. And strangely, that anonymity felt freeing. At night, I wrote in my notebook again, not about pain, but about possibility. I wasn't healed, I wasn't settled, but I was standing, on my own. I had nothing certain ahead of me, except the knowledge that I could survive. Progress didn't arrive all at once. It showed up quietly, in moments that might seem ordinary to others. The first win came when my course instructor emailed me saying my final project stood out. I read that message 3 times just to be sure. No one had praised my work in years. Not my patience, not my sacrifice, my ability. That recognition lit something inside me. Soon after, a part-time opportunity opened up. Nothing glamorous, but aligned with what I had learned. The interview was simple. No pressure, no need to explain my life, just skills. When I got the callback, I didn't celebrate loudly. I sat down, closed my eyes, and let the relief wash over me. I began budgeting carefully, tracking every dollar, planning instead of guessing. Each responsible decision restored a piece of confidence. I reconnected with an old friend one afternoon. We talked about books, not burdens. She said, "You sound like yourself again." I hadn't realized how much I missed that version of me. I still struggled, still worried, but now those worries didn't define me. They motivated me. I wasn't chasing perfection. I was building stability. And for the first time, that felt enough. The victories were small, but they were finally mine. Life didn't suddenly become perfect. There was no dramatic success, no applause, but something far more important happened. I became whole again. Months passed. Slowly, steadily. I moved into a slightly better place. Nothing fancy, just enough to breathe. My work stabilized. My routine found balance. For the first time, my reflection didn't feel like a stranger. Daniel reached out occasionally, respectfully, carefully. We spoke like adults, not enemies, not lovers, just 2 people who had learned something the hard way. My children adjusted too. They didn't need a perfect mother. They needed a present one. And now, when they looked at me, they saw someone standing tall. One evening, as I walked home after work, the sun dipped low across the street. I stopped for a moment and realized something quietly powerful. I was no longer afraid of my own future. I had learned that love should never require disappearance, that sacrifice without respect is not virtue, it is loss. Choosing yourself doesn't mean abandoning others. It means showing them what self-worth looks like. If you're listening to my story and feel unseen, unheard, or small, please know this: you are not asking for too much. You are asking the wrong place. And it's never too late to walk towards yourself with dignity. I didn't rebuild my life to escape anyone. I rebuilt it to finally live.